What if the moment they finally realize you're gone is not the moment you leave the relationship, but the moment you stop leaving the door open? Think about that. There comes a moment when something changes inside you. You stop checking your phone. You stop wondering what they are thinking. You stop creating explanations for their silence. You stop asking, when will they come back? And instead, something deeper begins to rise within you. You begin asking, where am I going? That is transformation, because sometimes the greatest shift in your life happens when you stop trying to control someone else's response and start taking responsibility for your own direction. You may have spent months giving chances. You may have explained your heart over and over again. You may have tried to understand their distance, their silence, their fear, their contradictions. You may have thought, if I just love them enough, they will finally feel safe. If I become more patient, they will finally open up. If I give them enough space, they will come back. But listen carefully. Love is not supposed to require you to abandon yourself. There is a divine principle that operates in every area of life. What you continually tolerate, you teach people to expect. When someone believes you will always be available, always waiting, always forgiving, always reaching out, your presence can become something they assume rather than something they appreciate. But then one day you stop, not to manipulate them, not to make them jealous, not to punish them. You stop because you finally understand your value. And that is when the entire dynamic changes. They may have expected your message. It doesn't come. They may have expected you to ask how they are doing. You don't. They may have expected another conversation where you explain your feelings. There is silence. At first, they may feel relief because distance can feel comfortable when emotional intimacy feels threatening. But eventually, the silence becomes different. It stops feeling like freedom. It starts feeling like absence. And absence has a way of revealing what presence allowed someone to overlook. They begin remembering the little things, the conversations, the patience, the way you listened, the way you cared, the way you showed up when they were struggling, the emotional safety they once took for granted. And suddenly, they may begin to understand something they couldn't understand while you were standing right in front of them. You were not chasing them. You were loving them. There is a massive difference. Chasing says, I need you to validate my worth. Love says, I value you, but I will not destroy myself trying to convince you to value me. That distinction changes everything, because when you stop chasing, you don't become less loving. You become more disciplined. You become more conscious. You become more aligned with the life you were created to live, and maybe they notice. Maybe they don't. But here's the part you need to understand. Your transformation cannot depend on their realization. You cannot build your future around the hope that someone eventually understands your past. You cannot spend your life standing at a closed door waiting for someone else to decide whether they want to open it. At some point, you have to turn around. At some point, you have to look at your own life and say, there is still a purpose on my life. There is still work to do. There are still dreams to build. There is still love inside me that deserves somewhere healthy to go. That is when you become powerful, not when they miss you, not when they text you, not when they regret losing you. You become powerful when their behavior no longer determines your emotional state. And understand this. Sometimes people don't realize what they had until they no longer have access to it. But that realization is their journey. Your journey is different. Your journey is becoming the person who no longer needs someone else's return to feel complete. You have to understand that your worth was never created by another person's ability to recognize it. Your worth existed before they met you. Your purpose existed before they loved you. Your future existed before they walked into your life. And your future will continue after they leave it. So if they eventually realize you're truly gone, let them realize it. If they finally understand what your presence meant, let them understand it. If they look back and recognize that they lost someone who genuinely cared, let that realization belong to them. You don't need to run back and rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for another person is allow them to experience the truth of their decisions. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop volunteering for pain that you have already learned from. Your life is not a waiting room. Your heart is not a rehabilitation center for someone who refuses to confront themselves. Your future is not something you postpone until another person becomes emotionally available. You were created for movement, for growth, for purpose, for expansion, and maybe this chapter broke your heart. Maybe it forced you to confront things about yourself that you didn't want to see. Maybe you became addicted to uncertainty because uncertainty kept you emotionally connected. Maybe you confused longing with love. Maybe you confused inconsistency with mystery. Maybe you thought the intensity of the connection proved that it was meant to last, but intensity is not always intimacy. Sometimes intensity is simply the nervous system reacting to uncertainty. Real love does not require you to constantly decode another person's behavior. Real love does not demand that you become smaller so someone else can remain comfortable. Real love does not ask you to betray your boundaries to prove your loyalty. And real love does not require you to chase someone into choosing you. So today, choose yourself, not from bitterness, from wisdom, not from revenge, from self-respect, not because you want them to suffer, because you finally understand that your peace is valuable. There is a moment in every person's life when they have to decide whether they are going to continue repeating an old emotional pattern or step into a new identity. This is your moment. Stop asking, how can I make them realize what they lost? Ask instead, what can I build with the life I have been given? Stop asking, when will they come back? Ask, where am I going next? Stop asking, why wasn't I enough? Ask, why did I ever allow someone else's inability to love consistently to become evidence against my worth? You are enough, but being enough does not mean everyone will know how to love you. Being enough does not mean everyone will choose you. Being enough means you no longer need to abandon yourself when someone else doesn't. And that is freedom. The moment they realize you're truly gone may come after you have already found something greater than their return. You may have found your confidence again, your discipline, your faith, your purpose, your peace, your identity. You may wake up one morning and realize that you no longer want the old relationship back because you've become someone who requires something healthier. And that is the moment you know you've healed, not when you stop caring. But when caring no longer controls you, you can love someone and still let them go. You can remember someone and still move forward. You can wish them well without reopening a door that destroyed your peace. You can forgive without returning. You can understand their wounds without volunteering to be wounded by them. That's maturity. That's strength. That's spiritual growth. And if they come back someday, don't ask only, do they miss me? Ask better questions. Have they changed? Have they taken responsibility? Can they communicate? Can they show consistency? Can they build something instead of simply returning to what was familiar? Because missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Regretting losing you is not the same as becoming capable of loving you. And returning is not the same as transforming. Never confuse someone's emotional reaction to losing access with genuine personal growth. Your standard must be higher than that. You don't need someone to come back just because they finally realize your value. You need someone who recognizes your value while they have the opportunity to honor it. And if that person is not them, then let life teach you something beautiful. Sometimes losing someone is not the end of your love story. Sometimes it is the beginning of your relationship with yourself. So walk forward. Walk without needing applause. Walk without needing closure from someone who couldn't give it. Walk without needing them to understand your pain. Walk knowing that every step away from what diminished you is a step toward what was meant to strengthen you. Your life is bigger than this one connection. Your purpose is bigger than this one person. Your future is bigger than this one chapter. And one day you may look back and realize that the moment they finally understood you were truly gone was not the most important moment. The most important moment was when you finally realized you were never supposed to lose yourself just to keep someone else. That was the real turning point. That was the breakthrough. That was the beginning. And from this moment forward, don't chase what runs from you. Don't beg for what should be freely given. Don't negotiate against your own dignity. Don't confuse waiting with loyalty. Choose peace. Choose purpose. Choose growth. Choose the life that keeps calling you forward, because when you finally stop waiting for someone else to choose you, you become available for the life that has been waiting for you. And that life is not behind you. It is ahead. Go get it. There comes a moment when silence stops being a temporary pause and becomes a reality. And that moment can be deeply uncomfortable for someone who has always believed that you would eventually return. Maybe they became accustomed to your presence. They knew that after every disagreement, every withdrawal, every period of distance, you would eventually reach out. They knew that no matter how cold things became, some part of you was still waiting. And because you kept returning, they never had to fully experience what life would feel like without you. But then something changes. You stop, not dramatically, not angrily, not to create a reaction. You simply stop giving your energy to a situation that keeps draining you. And this is where the silence becomes powerful. Because when you were constantly reaching out, they could focus on your pursuit instead of their own behavior. They could tell themselves that you would always be there. They didn't have to confront the possibility of losing you because your actions kept reassuring them that you weren't really going anywhere. But when you become genuinely silent, there is nothing left to distract them from reality. Your absence begins speaking. And absence has a language that words cannot always express. It says, I finally understood. It says, I cannot keep doing this. It says, I love myself enough to stop participating in a cycle that keeps hurting me. That is not punishment. That is a boundary. And understand this. The goal is never to make someone panic. The goal is to stop living your life according to someone else's emotional availability. When you stop waiting, something powerful happens inside you. Your attention comes back, your energy comes back, your confidence begins coming back. You start remembering who you were before you became consumed with analyzing someone's behavior. You begin focusing on your work, your health, your dreams, your relationships, your faith, your future. And eventually, you realize something profound. You weren't actually losing them by walking away. You were losing yourself by continuing to wait. That realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop needing their response, you become emotionally free. Maybe they notice the silence immediately. Maybe they don't. Maybe they wonder why you haven't reached out. Maybe they assume you're going to return like you always did. But eventually, consistency tells the truth. One day passes, then another, and the message they once expected doesn't come. The person who used to ask questions isn't asking anymore. The person who used to explain everything has stopped explaining. The person who used to keep the connection alive has finally released their grip. And that is when they may begin realizing that this time is different. But remember, your victory is not their realization. Your victory is your transformation. You don't become powerful because they miss you. You become powerful because you stopped abandoning yourself. There is a divine principle here. When you release what you cannot control, you create space for what you can become. So let the silence be permanent if permanence is what your peace requires. Don't break your own boundary just because loneliness whispers your name. Don't reopen the door simply because curiosity makes you wonder whether they have changed. Let your actions communicate what your words could never convince them to understand. You are no longer waiting. You are moving. And sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not another message. It is the life you build after you stop sending them one. There is a moment when someone realizes that the person they thought would always be waiting has finally moved forward. And that realization can be more powerful than any argument, any goodbye, or any final message. Because as long as you are waiting, there is still an invisible connection. They may not call you. They may not ask about you. They may not admit that they are thinking about you. But somewhere inside, they can still believe that you are emotionally available. They assume the door is still open. They assume your feelings are still there. They assume that if they ever decide to return, you will be standing in the same place, ready to continue where everything stopped. But what happens when you stop waiting? Everything changes. You don't announce it. You don't post about it. You don't try to make them jealous. You simply begin living. And there is something incredibly powerful about a person who no longer organizes their life around someone else's decision. You wake up and stop checking your phone. You stop wondering whether today will be the day they finally reach out. You stop replaying old conversations and searching for hidden meanings. You stop asking friends what they think that silence means. You stop building imaginary futures around someone who has not shown you a consistent present, and slowly your mind becomes quiet. That quietness is freedom, because waiting can become a prison when your emotional life depends on someone else's next move. You may think you're being loyal, but sometimes you're simply postponing your own life. You may call it patience, but sometimes it is fear of accepting reality. You may tell yourself that they just need more time, when deep down you know that you have already given more time than your heart can afford. And then one day you make a decision. I am not waiting anymore. That sentence doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped putting your life on hold. You can still love someone and refuse to wait indefinitely for them. You can still appreciate what you shared and choose not to return to what wounded you. You can still hope they grow while refusing to make their growth your responsibility. That is emotional maturity. And when you stop waiting, the other person may eventually sense the change. They may wonder why you're not reaching out. They may wonder why your attention isn't available anymore. They may begin to notice that the emotional security they once took for granted is no longer guaranteed. But don't make their realization your objective. Your objective is to reclaim your life. There is a greater purpose unfolding. When you stop chasing what is uncertain, your energy becomes available for creation. Your mind becomes available for learning. Your heart becomes available for healthy connection. Your future becomes available for possibility. And suddenly the question changes. You no longer ask, will they come back? You ask, what am I becoming? That is a completely different question. Because when your identity is attached to whether someone returns, you give them control over your emotional future. But when your identity is rooted in purpose, their decision becomes information, not destiny. Maybe they return. Maybe they don't. But either way, you keep moving. That is the point. You are not walking away so they will chase you. You are walking forward because your life is too valuable to spend standing still. And one day, you may realize that the greatest thing you ever stopped waiting for was not another person. It was permission to heal, permission to grow, permission to become happy again, but permission to stop explaining yourself, permission to choose peace. You never needed anyone's permission. You needed courage. So let today be the day you stop waiting for someone else to decide your worth. Stop waiting for the message. Stop waiting for the apology. Stop waiting for the explanations. Stop waiting for the version of them you imagined they could become. Build a version of yourself you were always capable of becoming, because when you stop waiting, you don't lose your future. You finally begin living it. There is something powerful about distance. It can hide a person from your eyes, but it cannot always erase them from your mind. When you are constantly present, someone can become accustomed to you. Your messages become normal. Your kindness becomes expected. Your voice becomes familiar. Your presence becomes part of the background of everyday life. But when you disappear from that routine, something changes. The silence creates space, and in that space, memories can become louder. At first, someone may convince themselves that distance is exactly what they wanted. They may stay busy. They may focus on work, entertainment, friends, responsibilities, or anything else that keeps their attention away from their emotions. They may tell themselves, I'm fine. But being distracted is not the same as being healed. Eventually, life becomes quiet. A familiar song plays. A place reminds them of you. A certain time of day brings back an old conversation. They see something you once shared, and suddenly a memory appears without permission. That is when distance can become emotionally revealing. Because when you were there, they could focus on the pressure of closeness. They could focus on what felt uncomfortable. They could focus on the reasons they needed space. But when you are truly absent, there is nothing left to react against. They are left with the memories, and memories have a strange way of preserving what the mind tried to dismiss. They may remember the way you listened when nobody else did. They may remember how you encouraged them. They may remember your patience. They may remember the ordinary moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now carry unexpected meaning. They may remember laughter, a conversation in the middle of the night, a simple message, a moment when they felt understood, and suddenly, what they once considered ordinary becomes valuable. This is why you should never underestimate the power of genuine presence. When you love someone sincerely, you leave impressions, but understand something important. You should not create memories simply to make someone miss you. You should not perform love for future regret. You should not live thinking, one day they'll realize what they lost. That keeps you emotionally connected to their reaction. Instead, love sincerely while you are there, and when it is time to leave, leave with dignity. Let the memories belong to the past. Let them process them however they need to. Your responsibility is not to control what someone remembers. Your responsibility is to create a future worth remembering yourself. There is a divine principle here. Sometimes separation reveals value because presence made that value easy to overlook. But the lesson isn't always about getting someone back. Sometimes the lesson is about understanding what the relationship taught you. Maybe it taught you patience. Maybe it taught you boundaries. Maybe it taught you what communication should look like. Maybe it taught you what you will never tolerate again. Maybe it showed you how deeply you are capable of loving. And maybe it taught you that love, without reciprocity, eventually becomes exhaustion. So if memories become louder for them after you leave, let them. If they begin remembering the good, let them. If they begin recognizing what they lost, let them. You don't need to interrupt their process. You don't need to send another message just because you suddenly feel nostalgic. You don't need to reopen the door because the past feels beautiful tonight. Remember, nostalgia can make the past look better than reality was. A memory can be beautiful while the relationship was unhealthy. You can cherish what was good without returning to what's harmful. That is wisdom. And as you move forward, create new memories. Travel somewhere you've always wanted to go. Build something meaningful. Again. Learn something new. Strengthen your relationships. Reconnect with your purpose. Become so engaged with your own life that the past no longer has to compete with your future. Because eventually, the greatest transformation happens when the memories stop controlling you. You remember without breaking. You care without chasing. You appreciate without returning. You forgive without forgetting your boundaries. And you move forward without needing anyone else to validate the decision. Let the past be a teacher, not a prison. Let distance reveal whatever it needs to reveal. And if someone eventually realizes the depth of what they lost, that realization belongs to their journey. Your journey is to become the person who no longer needs to be remembered by someone else, to know that your presence mattered, you still matter. And the life waiting for you is asking you to stop looking backward long enough to see what is ahead. There comes a moment when someone finally understands that having access to your love was never an entitlement. It was a privilege. When you were always available, they may not have recognized the value of your presence. Your messages came easily. Your patience seemed endless. Your forgiveness was always within reach. Whenever distance appeared, you were often the one trying to rebuild the bridge. And when something is constantly available, people can become careless with it. But the moment you step back, they are forced to see what your presence was actually giving them. You were not simply sending messages. You were offering attention. You were offering emotional support. You were offering patience. You were offering understanding. You were offering a space where they could be seen without pretending. That kind of presence is rare. And sometimes people don't recognize rare things until they no longer have easy access to them. But listen carefully. Your purpose is not to make someone regret losing access to you. Your purpose is to understand that you should never have to beg someone to appreciate what you freely give. There is a difference between being generous and being endlessly available. Generosity comes from abundance. Over-availability can come from fear. Fear that if you stop giving, they will leave. Fear that if you establish boundaries, they will stop loving you. Fear that if you don't keep reaching out, the connection will disappear. But what if the connection disappears simply because you stop carrying it alone? That is not failure. That is information. A relationship cannot be sustained indefinitely by one person's effort. If you are always initiating, always repairing, always understanding, always forgiving, and always waiting, eventually you have to ask yourself an honest question: where is the reciprocity? Because love should not feel like an audition where you continually prove why you deserve to be chosen. You don't need to convince someone of your value. You need to recognize it yourself. When you recognize your value, your standards change. You stop accepting crumbs simply because you are hungry for connection. You stop celebrating inconsistency because you are afraid of losing someone. You stop interpreting minimal effort as hidden love. You stop making excuses for behavior that repeatedly violates your peace. And this is where your power returns. You begin understanding that access to your time is valuable. Access to your attention is valuable. Access to your emotional world is valuable. Access to your vulnerability is valuable. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to you simply because they once had it. People earn deeper access through consistency, honesty, respect, and responsibility. And if someone loses access because they repeatedly failed to honor it, you don't have to feel guilty for closing the door. A boundary is not revenge. A boundary is clarity. It says, this is what I will participate in, and this is what I will no longer accept. That is self-respect in action. Maybe one day they realize it. Maybe they look back and understand that they had someone who genuinely cared. Maybe they recognize that your patience was not weakness. Maybe they finally understand that your silence wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion. It was clarity. It was the consequence of repeatedly giving without receiving. But their realization is not the destination. Your growth is, there is a divine wisdom in allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices. Sometimes you cannot teach someone the value of something by explaining it. Life has to teach the lesson through experience. So don't rush to rescue them from that lesson. If they miss your presence, let them process it. If they regret their behavior, let them learn from it. If they realize your value, let that realization mature into responsibility. And if they return, don't measure their sincerity by emotion alone. Measure it by consistency. Words can be beautiful. Promises can be powerful. But repeated actions reveal character. You don't need someone who simply misses having access to you. You need someone who understands the responsibility that comes with having access to your heart. That is the standard. And if they cannot meet it, keep moving. Because your life is too valuable to spend convincing someone that your presence matters. Know your worth, protect your peace, honor your boundaries, give love freely, but never give yourself away in the process. The right people will not require you to disappear before they recognize your value. And the moment you understand that, you stop fearing their absence. You start respecting your own. You realize that losing access to you is not something you need to threaten. It is simply the natural consequence of no longer accepting less than what your heart, your values, and your future require. You are not difficult to love. You are simply learning that love without respect is not enough. And once you understand that, you will never again confuse being available with being valued. There is a powerful moment that happens when you stop trying to change someone else and start changing yourself. Because as long as you are chasing, explaining, convincing, forgiving, and trying to rescue the relationship, the other person can remain focused on you. They can focus on your messages, your questions, your emotions, your reactions. But when you step away, the mirror turns toward them, and suddenly they have to face themselves. That is uncomfortable because your absence removes the distraction. When you were always available, they could tell themselves, they understand me. They could believe that no matter how distant they became, you would eventually return. They didn't have to fully examine their behavior because the relationship kept resetting. But when you stop participating in that cycle, something changes. They are left alone with their own choices. And that is where transformation either begins or resistance becomes stronger. They may start asking questions they avoided before. Why did I push them away? Why did I become distant when things became emotionally serious? Why did I assume they would always be there? Why did I wait until they walked away to understand what they meant to me? Those questions can be painful, but sometimes pain is the beginning of awareness. There is a divine principle in life. What we refuse to confront often continues to control us. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot transform a pattern you insist doesn't exist. And you cannot build healthy intimacy while constantly running from emotional responsibility. Your decision to step away does not automatically transform another person. Understand that you are not responsible for their healing. You are not their therapist. You are not their rescuer. You cannot love someone into becoming emotionally ready, but your absence may remove the environment that allowed their old patterns to continue comfortably. That is different. You are not punishing them. You are simply refusing to participate. And sometimes that is the most honest form of communication. When you stop chasing, they lose the ability to blame your pursuit for their discomfort. When you stop demanding explanations, they are left with their own unanswered questions. When you stop trying to fix everything, they may finally notice how much responsibility they were avoiding. And whether they grow from that realization is their choice. But you have a choice too. You can continue watching their journey, waiting for evidence that they have changed, or you can continue changing yourself. Choose yourself, because your transformation is not supposed to be a performance designed to make someone regret losing you. It is supposed to be the natural result of finally understanding your own worth. You start becoming more disciplined, more peaceful, more intentional. You stop reacting to every emotional trigger. You stop checking whether they have viewed something. You stop interpreting every small sign. You stop allowing another person's silence to control your day. And eventually, you become someone who doesn't need to know what they are thinking. That's freedom. Maybe they notice your transformation. Maybe they become curious. Maybe they wonder how you became so different. Maybe they finally understand that the person they once had access to is no longer available in the same way. But let them wonder. Your job is not to explain your growth. Your life is the explanation. Your peace is the explanation. Your discipline is the explanation. Your boundaries are the explanation. And if they ever return, don't be impressed by temporary emotion. Look for evidence. Look for accountability. Look for consistency. Look for emotional maturity. Look for changed behavior when things become uncomfortable. Because real transformation does not appear only when someone fears losing you. It appears when they are willing to do the work, even when there is nothing to gain immediately. And that is the standard you should hold. You don't need someone to change because they are afraid of losing you. You need someone who changes because they finally understand who they want to become. So keep growing, keep healing, keep building, keep moving toward your purpose. Let your life become so rooted that someone else's emotional distance can no longer shake your foundation, because the greatest transformation isn't when they finally face themselves. It is when you finally stop making their self-confrontation your responsibility. Their journey belongs to them. Your journey belongs to you. And your journey is calling you forward. Don't turn around just to see whether they are following. Keep walking, build the life, become the person, honor the purpose. And if one day they finally face the mirror and realize what they lost, let them learn from it. But you keep becoming. There comes a point when healing becomes real, not because the other person comes back, but because you no longer need them to. That is the moment you choose purpose over their return. Maybe once, your greatest hope was to see their name appear on your phone. You imagined the apology. You imagined the conversation. You imagined them finally saying everything you had been waiting to hear. But eventually, something deeper changes. You begin to realize that your life cannot be built around a possibility. You cannot postpone your happiness until someone becomes ready. You cannot put your dreams on hold while waiting for someone to decide whether they want you. And you cannot make another person's return the evidence that you were worthy of love. Your worth was never dependent on their return. Your future was never dependent on their apology. Your purpose was never dependent on their ability to recognize you. There is a greater assignment on your life. And sometimes the greatest breakthrough happens when you stop asking, will they come back? And start asking, what am I here to become? That question changes everything because purpose demands movement. Purpose asks you to wake up even when your heart is heavy. Purpose asks you to keep building when nobody is applauding. Purpose asks you to become disciplined when your emotions want to retreat into the past. Purpose reminds you that your life is bigger than one relationship. You have gifts you haven't fully developed, dreams you haven't completed, people you haven't met, places you haven't seen, lessons you haven't learned, lives you may still impact. There are doors that cannot open while you are standing at an old door waiting for someone else to turn the handle. So release it, not because it didn't matter, because it mattered enough to teach you. Let the relationship teach you what you deserve. Let the heartbreak teach you boundaries. Let the disappointment teach you discernment. Let the silence teach you self-control. Let the loss teach you gratitude for your own presence. And let the experience become fuel instead of a prison. You don't need to hate someone to move forward. You don't need revenge. You don't need them to suffer. You don't even need them to regret losing you. You simply need to decide that your future deserves more attention than your past. That is strength. And if they return someday, let them return to a person who has grown, not the person who was waiting, not the person who was begging, not the person who was trying to prove their worth. Let them meet someone who has developed standards, someone who understands that love must be reciprocal, someone who knows that consistency matters, someone who can say, I care about you, but I will not abandon myself for you. That is a different kind of love. It is love with boundaries, love with wisdom, love with self-respect. And if they never return, you still win because your life did not stop. Your purpose did not disappear. Your future did not close. You kept becoming. You kept moving. You kept growing. And eventually, you may reach a place where their return isn't even the dream anymore. Peace is the dream. Purpose is the dream. A healthy relationship is the dream. A meaningful life is the dream. Waking up and genuinely loving the person you have become is the dream. That is the ultimate victory because the goal was never to make someone realize what they lost. The goal was to realize what you were losing every time you abandoned yourself trying to keep them. And once you understand that, you stop chasing, you stop waiting, you stop negotiating with uncertainty, you stop living in the past. You turn your attention toward the life in front of you, walk toward it with courage, build with intention, love with wisdom, give without losing yourself, forgive without reopening every door, remember without returning. And trust that what is truly aligned with your life will not require you to destroy your peace to keep it. Maybe they come back, maybe they don't. But either way, you keep going because your purpose is bigger than their presence. Your future is greater than their absence, and the life you are meant to live is waiting for you to stop looking behind you. So lift your head, take the next step, choose yourself, choose growth, choose purpose, and let the future become so meaningful that you no longer need the past to change in order for you to move forward. That is when you know you are truly free.